Testing, testing. Not hearing it yet. No. Well, we'll work on it. See what's going on. Good to see all of you this morning. Manuel, can you find a seat, sir? It's good to see everyone, and I'm looking at the average age of everyone in this class and realizing, well, yeah, daylight savings time. These are the folks that get up early anyway. Most of you. So, what's that? Yeah, your phone woke you up. We're working on microphones. So, is it on now? No. Well, I just am in the live spot. Great. Well, let's begin with a prayer. somewhat obstinate group of hearers. But then that day, verse 35, when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in boat. There were also other boats with him, and a furious squall came up. The waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped, and Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Well, both of these mention a lake. What lake are we talking about? Had to be the Sea of Galilee. That's where most of the teaching of Jesus took place. In Galilee, that's where these gentlemen that were with him, a lot of his disciples were from the Sea of Galilee. I thought it would help us to just do a very little bit of geography this morning, just so we see what we're talking about. Here's a topographical map taken or made from a very high place. I guess it would be a satellite kind of map. If you look at, you see two bodies of water, the one on the bottom, the Dead Sea, the one on the top, the Sea of Galilee, and you notice that they're both down in a valley with mountains on both sides. Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long, 7.5 miles wide, and 140 feet deep, pretty deep. But what's interesting about that lake, or the sea, and the Dead Sea is that they are so far below sea level. Did you know that the land around the Dead Sea is the lowest place on the planet? It's the lowest place that's on the planet. It's like 2,500 or 2,800 meters below, or feet below sea level. The surface of the Sea of Galilee, 680 feet below sea level. Well, why is that? Do you see how that's kind of cut down there from one sea to the other? It's located in what we would call the Jordan Rift Valley. You might want to tell me what a rift valley is? Where two tectonic plates come together and shift a little bit. The Arabian plate and the African plate kind of connect at this rift. And if you will follow that on a bigger map, you can follow that rift all the way from Lebanon, all the way through Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, all the way down the east part of Africa. And you'll notice it'll split in Africa, and there are a lot of lakes, just like there are here, right along that Rift Valley. Notice in this picture, if you go to the top middle, you can kind of see the Sea of Galilee toward the left there. You see the Mediterranean Sea on the left, you see the Sea of Galilee, and then the Dead Sea, and then the Gulf of Aqaba down at the bottom. That's where this Rift Valley runs. Well, here's a green picture of it, just so you can see it again. The Jordan Rift, the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, also called Gennesaret. Luke calls it Gennesaret in Luke chapter 5. We read about it in the Old Testament as well. Kinnereth, Joshua 11, and in Deuteronomy, when God is laying out the area for the Promised Land, that name is mentioned. Joshua 11, and I don't remember the Deuteronomy passage at this time. Tiberias, the Sea of Tiberias, or the Lake of Tiberias, is also what the Romans called it, after one of their leaders. An interesting place. Looks fairly calm, and it typically is fairly calm. If you look to the back of that picture, you can see some of those mountains. But the lake was known for the storms that pop up. If you were to go north, continue going north up the Rift Valley into Lebanon, you would find a mountain. Do you remember the name of that tall mountain? Not Nebo, Hermon. Mount Hermon, the highest the highest mountain is typically snow-covered, where the Lebanese go skiing and a lot of people around that region. But when that winds come down from the north, they'll come down through the channels and those valleys and those rifts, and they'll come down. That cold air will meet the warm air that comes up over the Sea of Galilee and make some pretty ominous storms. There's another one that just kind of shows you. You can see how it's just kind of sets in a basin, a great place to have a bad storm. Well, let's get to the story. What kind of men is he dealing with? I mean, it says in verse 23, Matthew 8, he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. What kind of men did he have as disciples? Typically fishermen, followers. Did they know boats? Well, yeah, that's probably their boat that they're getting into. They knew boats. They fished on this lake every day. They were well acquainted with the topography. They were well acquainted with the weather. They knew the waters and they knew the boat. But it says suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. I might add to this, and I don't know if it plays a role, that there were a lot of superstitions in the time about water and about how deep water where the demons were. That was a scary thing to be in deep water, and I guess I can understand that because I grew up that way. You know, I didn't mind swimming in a lake, but I just couldn't think too long about what's down there where I can't see it. You know, it was scary, the unknown. And so that may have played a role. The depths of the sea was supposed to be the realm of demons. And at best, it was the place even the Jews believed that that's the place where the demons and the gods collided. God and demons clashed. But I don't think this was an average storm. A furious storm, he calls it. A furious storm. Fishermen were used to sailing through storms. Mark calls it a furious squall. So this was something that formed. Waves broke over the boats. You can see these poor guys trying to deal with that. This is probably a little smaller boat than what we were dealing with. We don't know. It was a bad storm. It's threatened to swamp it. And again, Jesus was asleep at the keel. Actually, he wasn't asleep at the keel. He was asleep in the boat somewhere. Probably scholars think, and it's just not important. It says a cushion. It could have been a leather-covered cushion. It could have been a bag of sand that they used for ballast. At any rate, he's sleeping. He'd been teaching all day long. Jesus got tired too. Been teaching all day long, and he's sleeping. The disciples panic. Probably they had been frantically bailing water out of the boat to keep it from sinking, and Jesus is sleeping. So fast asleep that the frantic disciples have to wake him up. Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Or as, what did Mark say? Don't you care that we're going to drown? And Jesus replies, Master, I didn't even mention Luke. Does somebody have a question? Where's faith? Luke records this as well as Master, and it says, Master, Master, we're going to drown. Here it says, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. Luke says, Master, we're going to drown. Mark says, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? I thought that was interesting how all three of them used different terms to refer to the same person. One called him the teacher, rabbi, one called him the Lord, and the other called him Master. Master. Well, Jesus could have been sleeping at the keel, but he certainly wasn't asleep at the wheel, was he? That was a joke. Thank you for laughing. Verse 26, he replied, You of little faith, why are you so afraid? He got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Now, This is the important connection. What do we see in Jesus here in this whole situation? That he could sleep through a storm. Complete control. He's at peace. He's at peace. He's not troubled by what's going on outwardly. He's at peace inside. So much so that, I know he was tired, but so much so that he could sleep. I couldn't sleep in a boat going up and down on those waves, especially as it got worse and worse and the wind came up. Maybe winds like we had last night, and rain, add the waves to that, and it would have been pretty nasty. But Jesus could sleep through that. He had control. And I think that's where we see the lion element of this whole picture, don't we? The lion and the lamb. The lion of Judah, the powerful lion who is in control. Jesus had this. He had this. You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Don't you know who you got in the boat with you? Don't you know who you've got in the boat with you? Well, Jesus calms the winds, calms the storm and the wind and the waves. And did you notice it says he rebuked them? I think that's why a lot of the scholars think, well, maybe it was this thought of demons occupying the deep. Jesus wants them to know he has control over any of that. Let's look at Mark just very quickly. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And the wind died down, and it was completely calm. You know, we're dying, don't you? You of little faith. Matthew, that's what Matthew says. Luke says, where's your faith? And again, don't you know who I am? Faith is something that can be strong or weak, can it?
This is just something that I had pondered. Do you think that maybe if they asked the question or came to him much differently, that he would have, he would have accepted the response better? Like if they had come to him and said, "Master, please help us to calm the waves because we find it difficult," instead of assuming they were all going to die.
Yeah. The question is, do you think if they had worded their question a little differently, maybe a little more faith, showed a little more faith, that Jesus would have responded differently? What do you think? I doubt it. I mean, I think Jesus, he knows their lack of faith. He knows what's in each one of them. And I think his whole point is here, why are you so afraid? You've got the master in the boat with you. They got to learn to trust him. They got to learn to trust him. Imagine these men had accompanied Jesus up to this point. They had seen his healing people with illnesses. They had accompanied, they heard his teaching, which was amazing. But there's just that doubt there. There's just that doubt there. And then there's those things that come in that this world throws at us and just throw us off kilter, get us off the track. Sharon? I'd have been holding on to his legs or something. I don't know. I'd have been horrified by something like that. I just don't do well with that. I just don't do well with that. Faith is like that, isn't it? I mean, faith is something that can be strong at times. We feel confident in it, but then it can be weak. What are some things in our lives that kind of blow our faith off track? Depression can blow our faith off track. Trials and tribulations, okay?
Unexpected events that you're just not ready for.
Boy, you think you've got life in order, you think things are just going along well, and boom, you get broadsided by something that just throws you for a loop. Imagine, and some of you maybe experienced this. I'm not even knowing the name of the family, Pam, that had the, what's that? Mark Rogers family. Can you imagine such a secure family, a faithful family, And within seconds, and this just happened, what, Friday night? Yesterday. They had an accident out by the airport out there. It wasn't even their fault. And the husband died in the accident. 3 kids, wife were in the car with him. She was released. I think the kids are still in the hospital. But where does your faith go when it gets hit broadsided like that? You know, we can either hold on tight and trust the one that's sleeping in the boat, or we can just throw ourselves to the waves and see what happens. Those unexpected things.
Many times people ask me how I handle the death of my son, and all I can say is only by the Lord.
Only with the Lord's help. Only with the Lord's help. You would think that they would have known Jesus, but again, like Randy said, when those things hit us, broadside us, just come out of nowhere, that's a real test of our faith. And this was a real test of...
Mark 39, when he says peace, be still,
Uh-huh.
he's telling us to shut up and listen to.
That could be. That'd be a good way of saying it. When he says peace, be still in Mark, maybe he's saying just shut up and listen.
He was speaking
Trust.
to them and not the wind.
Maybe he was speaking to them and not the wind. That's good. That's good.
But I heard that song that was at Peace Be Still. I was a fan coming from that, but I think that's one of those beautiful songs.
That is a good song, and yes, this is where that came from. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high, the sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter nor help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? What's that? How canst thou lie asleep when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep? Yeah. Yeah, it's a great song. Maybe we should sing that at the end of our class today. What kind of man is this? Verse 27. I keep, if anything, I like to funnel stories down to one little thing, and if there was a place where I would stop and park, it would be right there. What kind of man is that? What kind of man is this who can still the waves? The winds and the waves obey him.
Just seconds before that, they were calling on him now.
Yeah.
They were like, Jesus, come help us.
Master, help us. Lord, help us. Well, what did they expect him to do? And when he does it, they say, wow, what kind of guy is this? Indeed, what kind of a man can do that? James and I were talking Thursday at lunch about the Exodus from Egypt and kind of imagining what it would be like to be pursued by the Egyptian army across a desert you didn't know. Okay, you're just following. Yeah, I mean, it would have been incredible. And you think about, these people had only started to know God. They were just learning to know who this God was. And they weren't getting very far, okay? They were trying, I guess, maybe to be faithful, but seen his mighty works in Egypt, the plagues and all of that. Verse 14, or verse 31 in Exodus 14, even after God rescued them and had shown them his mighty works. Exodus 14:31. When the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and Moses his servant. Well, if you think about it, we've got a parallel here, because these men in the boat had just recently learned to know Jesus, gotten to know him. They were still learning about how he was, about how he acted, and still this whole Messiah picture was just way too much for them to grasp. Who is this man? Even the winds and the waves. They couldn't grasp this side of him. Even the wind and the waves obey him. Well, I think it's pretty obvious, and we've talked about that, how this incident or this occurrence shows the lion side of the Messiah. He's powerful. He's got everything under control. He's going to take this where it needs to be. Any more questions before we go on to the second story for today? related one, something that took place on the same lake. If you want to move over to Matthew chapter 14. And I want you to, again, to look at chapter 14. And this is a good way, just a real quick way to kind of figure out what kind of a context you're in, if indeed these guys did do a chronological context. John the Baptist was beheaded at the beginning of chapter 14, verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Okay? That would be an awakening to hear that John the Baptist had been killed. When Jesus landed, verse 14, and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, healed their sick. Verse 15, as evening approached, disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. We know what happened, don't we? Jesus feeds 5,000 men and their wives and children with a few loaves and fishes. Thought this picture was a good one for that. I thought it was interesting that this all began with Jesus' compassion on the crowd, healing as many as he could at the time. All day long this is going on, and at evening they feed the 5,000. Well, verse 22, where our story begins, and I'll be reading from there. Immediately, those are always key words when we start new paragraphs. Immediately, Jesus made, after all of that had happened, immediately thereafter, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat, go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. I don't know how he did that. I'd like to have seen how he dismissed the crowd after feeding them. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. So here we've got the setting. Jesus disperses the crowd. He sent the disciples in the boat to the other side to go on ahead of him. It means he's going to meet him there. And he went up on a mountainside to pray. Verse 24, the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Imagine trying to row across that lake with a wind, a headwind, okay? That really ain't do any good to have a sail. You're having to row as hard as you can, and you're probably not making any progress. If you're making any, it's very little. Shortly before dawn, verse 25, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. That's a lot of superstition. I mean, there was a lot of superstition among the Jews. And among those people, you know, the unknown causes us to conjure up pictures of things that we don't know. You ever wake up in the middle of the night with those unknown fears? You don't know where they come from? I did this morning. I don't know what time it was, 3 o'clock or something. You know, you're shaking, you're shivering, you're thinking, man, is there something under the bed? You know, but when they saw something that they couldn't grasp, like the depths of a body of water, or seeing someone walking on water, who had seen that before? It was a frightening, a terrifying thing. It's a ghost, but Jesus, verse 27, immediately said to them, take courage, it's I, don't be afraid. And then we find Peter, and I think I'll take a break there before we talk about Peter, and just to get us down in the context. Did you sense, beginning in verse 22, that Jesus really needed a break? Think about it. He's a human. He learns that John the Baptist, whom he held in great regard, we saw that several weeks ago, he was on Jesus' favorite person list, if you want. What's that? He was related to him. He thought very highly of John the Baptist. To hear that he had been beheaded, that was a moving thing for him. And then to be confronted by this crowd of who knows how many thousands of people. And then, by the words of his disciples, hey, this is a remote place, it's getting late, send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy some food. Jesus says, you get them something to eat. Well, Jesus retreats to a mountainside to pray, sends his disciples off. It's a windy night. I know most of us have heard our share of sermons about what happened here, but I just have to always, for myself, my study, set the context and draw those pictures in my mind. It's before dawn, it's dark, the winds have been going all night ever since they started. They're exhausted, and they look out, and if you look at paintings of this, you see this lit up, white clothes Jesus walking across the water, you know. I don't imagine that's how it was. Maybe it was. Yeah, but imagine him walking across these waves, wind blowing his hair. It would have been a frightening thing to think about. They'd already seen him calm the storm and said, what kind of a man is this? And now they see someone out there walking on the water, and they hear his voice. Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it's I, don't be afraid. Yeah, right. Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Let's read on. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. I've fought with Peter's words for a long, long time. Lord, if it's you. Who else would be walking on the water, okay? I know they don't know Jesus' power and what all he can do, but those words just, I find a little amusing. Lord, if it's you. Otherwise, it's got to be some horrible, evil ghost, right? If it's you, tell me to come on the water. What do we know about Peter? Impetuous. Okay, what else? What's that? He's human. He's always the first one to speak up and say his mind. Yeah.
Now, we don't know for certain, but history of the time says that most of those men, even though they were fishermen, couldn't swim.
I've read that, yeah.
So that says a lot for Peter to get out.
That's a good point. A lot of scholars think, well, these men probably couldn't swim. To be in a storm in the middle of the night without a life preserver, yeah, I don't want to be there. Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Peter did. Peter walked on the water. Did you notice that? Come, Jesus said. Verse 29, then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. As long as you're focused, you know, you've heard the sermons before, keep your eyes on Jesus. As long as you got your eyes on Jesus, you're going to be able to walk forward. As soon as we look left, or as soon as we look right, as soon as we see those circumstances around us, what's going to happen? The fears are going to come, aren't they? As soon as we lose our focus, lose our trust, lose our hold on him, the fears are going to come, and that's what he did. When he saw the wind, you can't see the wind. We know that obviously meant what the wind was doing. When he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink. What a horrible, horrible feeling. Boop, to go under the water. He cried out, Lord, save me. And I love this picture. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith. Why did you doubt? Well, why did he doubt? Why did he doubt? Took his eyes off him. Took his eyes off of him. What's that? He lost his focus. Yeah. The response of the disciples is pretty amazing. Verse 32, when they climbed into the boat, Jesus and Peter, the wind died down. Now, Matthew says it this way, then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. You can walk on water. You can still the storm. Yes, we're not going to go any further than that in that context, but I want us to look at the parallel passage in Mark. This would be in Mark chapter 6. And some of this will be repetition, but I think it's always refreshing to see the differences. Later that night, verse 47, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land, and he saw the disciples straining at the oars. Paint this picture in your mind. Before dawn, shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake, and he was about to pass by them when they saw him walking on the lake, and they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they had all seen him and were terrified. That's basically a word-for-word parallel. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it's I, don't be afraid." And then he climbed in the boat with them. We don't read about Peter in this instance. They were completely amazed. And verse 52, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. It's interesting that Mark adds that, isn't it? What do you think? What's going on here? They had not understood about the loaves, for their hearts were hardened. Comments? What was not to understand about the loaves? I mean, yeah. Where'd all that bread come from? How did he do that? There's some confusion there. There's some inner turmoil going on, trying to figure out just who this, what kind of a man is this?
What scares us the worst? It's the unknown.
Yeah.
Stuff that you do not know. Like say the deep of the water, they don't know what's there.
That's right. That's right. And that was, what they have seen is unparalleled. No one has ever seen anybody feed 5,000 plus people with a basket full of food. No one, what's that? And have leftovers. No one's ever seen somebody walk on water. These were unprecedented things that they had seen, and it is trying their faith. And I don't think we need to have any bad feelings about them when we read their hearts were hardened. What hardened their hearts?
They couldn't figure it out. They just don't understand how that could happen.
The unknown, yeah. The unknown hardened their hearts. And it does that, doesn't it?
We must be confused somehow.
Yeah.
It didn't happen.
Something's just not right. Other comments? Fear? Fear hardens our hearts, doesn't it? Absolutely does. Absolutely does. It makes no room for faith when we block it with fear. They had not understood about the loaves, for their hearts were hardened. Well, I thought that was amazing. One writer says they worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And the other writer says their hearts, they didn't know what was going on. And I think we may have responses from different disciples. I mean, there were more than 2 guys in this boat. A lot of people have thought maybe the whole crew of 12 was in the boat at the time. Possible, but there were a lot of men in that boat. Some of them were amazed by it, and someone said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." While on the other hand, some of them were just really having trouble with that. And sometimes some of us take a little longer to develop our faith than others, don't we? Fear has a different effect on different people. I think we've seen that in the last year pretty clearly. But I hope that we can stand with those who will look at Jesus, see what he can do, realize what he can do in our lives as well, and worship him for who he is. Not harden our hearts every time that we face fear. Any comments? Yes, sir. Marcus?
To me, that's the importance of his ministry. It's about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The length of time that he spent with these men. It took a while for him to get it to who he was. This was a learning
right. Well, a lot of this didn't come really 100% clear to them until Pentecost, till they had the Holy Spirit, until they got that, oh, wow, well, hey, that does make sense. You know, look at this, what happened. But think about it. They still followed him. With all their doubts, with all their fears, they still followed him. They still worshiped him. And I think that's a great lesson for us. Got time for one more comment. Don't let the fear of the unknown drag you down, okay? Remember who you're holding on to. Thank you very much.